Very pleased to welcome Moazzam Begg to the News Hour, the outreach director for the UK-based campaign group CAGE, also a former Guantanamo Bay detainee. But significantly for us today, Moazzam, you obviously spent a lot of time in Bosnia delivering humanitarian aid. This was in 1994, I believe. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I first went to Bosnia in late 93, 94, and then continued to go up until after the end of the war. I went with aid convoys and took ambulances, food, medicine, and so forth. We had a center that I went to near the city of Srebrenica in a town called Ostrazac. And there I witnessed many things, the mass graves that now you see. I saw some of them. I spoke to survivors of rape camps. I spoke to people who'd survived various massacres from the various Bosnian Serb units that were attacking Muslim towns and villages. So this was part of a sort of, for me, it was a kind of a connection also for my Muslim identity, which was key, because here were indigenous European white Slavic Muslims being massacred simply because they were Muslims. And that is what piqued my interest and got me connected to those people. And of course, what I learned as time went on was that this was happening right under the noses of the United Nations forces, of whom I saw many and sat with many and spoke to many. They were from across the board, so can't just blame one of them. There were the British, the Pakistanis, the Malaysians, the Turks, the Dutch. They were all physically there whilst the atrocities took place under their noses.
And I'll come back to that issue in a moment. I want to ask you, though, first about, well, based on what you just said, based on what you saw there, what sort of feeling did you get? Could you ever have anticipated that what would happen a year later did happen?
In a sense, yes, because many of the atrocities had already happened. You know, one of the reasons why I went was because the atrocities were already being reported. We knew about the rape camps and the concentration camps in places like Omarska and Banja Luka and so forth. So this was already public knowledge. It was already well known. In fact, one of the things that the British government did was to place the arms embargo on all parties. But the only ones who really suffered from that were the Bosnian Muslims, because they had no country connecting them to give them supplies. The Bosnian Serbs had Serbia, the Bosnian Croats had Croatia, the Muslims had literally nobody. So they were cut off. And so all of this, essentially, with the presence, as I said, of the United Nations forces, was still going on. We remember Srebrenica today, but Srebrenica didn't happen in a vacuum. It was a culmination of multiple atrocities that were taking place that led to the deaths of tens of thousands, ethnic cleansing, mass rape, and rape as a weapon of war that was used to impregnate Muslim women, so that the Serb soldiers said that you will give birth to the next generation of Serbs.
Moazzam, it's 25 years ago, so there is a whole generation now which either doesn't know about Srebrenica or knows very little about it. I'm wondering if one of them was listening to this right now, they would be wondering possibly, first and foremost, why did the United Nations, why did the international community do nothing? Can you give us that answer and explain it to, as I say, those people who...
The mandate was as peacekeepers. The mandate of the United Nations was as peacekeepers. Now, the problem is being a peacekeeper is when one side is much more militarily advanced and has much more firepower and is carrying out atrocities. In that sense, in that place, you don't keep the peace there, you stop the aggressor. And that's what they didn't do, because their mandate didn't allow them to do so. I spoke to many soldiers from various United Nations forces who told me that they were deeply upset and troubled that they couldn't. They were sitting there with their armored vehicles, tanks, helicopters, some had aircraft, and armed to the teeth. But what's the point of being in that situation when you're not allowed to do anything about it? And though I've been myself a captive of the United States of America and have suffered torture at their hands, I will say that the United States intervention did actually bring about an end. But the end happened after the European forces let it happen. And nothing could be more vivid than what the Dutch forces did in Srebrenica, allowing internally displaced people to come into Srebrenica, only then to abandon the forces of Ratko Mladic. And then, of course, the rest, as we know, is history.
Moazzam, I just want to read you, as a final question, I just want to read you a quote, and I'm sure you know it. It's from the Bosnian Serb commander Ratko Mladic, who said after Srebrenica had been taken over. He said all who wish to go will be transported, large and small, young and old. Don't be afraid, just take it easy. No one will harm you. It is utterly chilling thinking that that is what he said just before, on this day, the start of a massacre which killed 8,000 people.
Yes, I mean, I want to link this to what's to happen to today. Last year, it's important. Last year, when Brenton Tarrant, the Australian who went into the two mosques and killed 52 people as they prayed in New Zealand, as he was firing his gun, he was listening to songs. And those songs celebrated Radovan Karadzic, the indicted war criminal from the Bosnian Serb leadership. And so even as he killed those people, he was praising these ultra-nationalist Serbians who hated Islam and Muslims. And that's how somebody from the far right can kill these people and celebrate, even though those people who were killed were white themselves. So the link to that shouldn't be underestimated, because the rise of the far right, the rise of ultra-nationalism, the denial of Srebrenica and the horror and the genocide that took place is all taking place now at a time when we should have thought and would have thought that this episode would have been recognized just as previous genocides have been, and that is there is no tolerance at all for that type of behavior.
Fascinating and sobering talking to you today, Moazzam Begg. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.